Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry the clock got away from me a little bit. We're going to get started in just a moment. If you'd like to take a seat, that would be great. For those of you that are joining us virtually, the chat line is open. Anytime you have questions, if you would like to communicate with us here, by all means use that, particularly when we roll a little bit later into the morning. Our panel discussion is going to be rapid fire with, I think we've got 6 different presenters. It's going to be a lot of information very quick, and then we will break for lunch. So you have a time to maybe mull over some of that information that's shared. If you have questions, by all means, send it in. Those who are here in attendance personally, you've got note cards on your table. Anytime you've got a question that you want a little more information on, please feel free to write that question on a card. Leave it up so we can see it, and we've got staff that'll be circulating around, and we'll be able to get those picked up, and hopefully those questions get answered for you. So to get this started, first, thank you very much for coming, and good morning. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to join us today to learn, share, and then, most importantly, apply what's going to be presented today. The most basic of life-sustaining needs is water. The star of today's discussion is water. Specifically, surface water. That's an item that we need to use for existence, for commerce, and for moments of tranquility. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals and organizations that are working on issues related to water quality. Your hosts today, the Allen County Soil and Water Conservation District and the Maumee Watershed Alliance, would like to dedicate this conference to Greg Lake, who is unable to attend in person. Greg is the reason why many of us are here today. Greg is joining us virtually. Greg, thank you. I am Dan Wire, Vice President of the Maumee Watershed Alliance, and I am an associate member of the Allen County Soil and Water Conservation District. SWCDs were created to address soil and water issues after the Dust Bowl. We're still on that task, with many more partners contributing in amazing research and progress, and you're going to hear some of those partnering organizations this morning. Complicated by the push and pull of rural and urban needs, amplified by the climate evolution shifts, this work is reaching a crescendo of necessary action around the world, across the country, and specifically here in the Western Lake Erie Basin. Just what those actions are and how they will be carried out is what we hope to better understand today. Our previous discussions at the beautiful Promenade Park last night were impactful. Joining us was the mayor and lieutenant governor, along with a couple of the presenters today. Today we'll be joined by local, state, and federal representatives, individuals who have made their life's work working with and addressing the challenges, again, of the star today, water. A simple word and element with profound impacts when it's both good and when it's bad. The umbrella of the information and viewpoints shared today is Partnerships for Water Quality to inform and to inspire innovation. However, as I learned last night, those partnerships and collaborations are going to need an additional descriptor if we're to bring about results. Those partnerships and collaborations need to be built among decision makers. Those decision makers are all of us. Together, we can make the decisions that are needed to take the steps, again, to protect our star today, water. I would like to now introduce one of those quiet giants making those decisions collaboratively to safeguard our waters, Dick Waterfield. Dick Waterfield is a successful businessman who has earned the right to relax and enjoy the easy life. But instead, Dick has decided and committed to working for all of us now and in the future to ensure safe and adequate water for all. Mr. Waterfield is involved in many initiatives, and we're so fortunate to have him as a decision maker within our partnerships. Please welcome Dick Waterfield.
Thank you, Dan. Dan likes to take credit for introducing me to the environmental movement. He had me come to a conference a few years ago, and I was going to sit in the back and just see what's going on. He brought me up to the front row. But actually, my interest in environmental issues, I think, started when I was driving back and forth to Northwestern University, north of Chicago, during my college days, and I'd drive through Gary, and as you got closer, you saw the haze, air change, the smell, and I thought, there's something wrong with all the pollution being belched out of these steel plants that's affecting everybody, particularly the people in the area, their breath and their health. And so that's really what got me started. As I got into adulthood and spent 40 years in business, I was gradually able to to continue my interest in environmental support. And through the years, I've supported Hoosier Environmental Council with their work on CAFOs and coal ash ponds. I, of course, tried to support Dan's activities. The Advanced Energy Economy, AEE, that Mayor Graham Richard used to work on, has been a great lobbying organization in the State House. And PFW's Environmental Resources Center, I think, is going to catch its stride here pretty soon, and it's been fun to support them. One of my major interests has been supporting ELPC. ELPC is the Environmental Law and Policy Center, headquartered in Chicago, and their mission is to do whatever they can to promote water quality in all the Great Lakes. I have asked them, with part of my contributions, to focus on northeastern Indiana, and they have been active with helping design climate action plans and working on CAFO control in the Lake Erie Basin in Ohio. They're primarily work on litigation strategies. So it's been fun to try to make a little bit of a difference with that sort of thing. I should mention that my wife's her family has a foundation in Indianapolis called the Mckinney Family Foundation, and they have grown to the point that now they are making grants of $2 million a year, and they're really working on partnerships and collaboration that we talked about a little bit last night. They work with the Gun Foundation, which you Ohio folks probably have heard of, McKnight Foundation, Energy Foundation, and they're really trying to promote environmentally sustainable policies. So I guess my message here is that those of us in the private sector, there's plenty of us in the private sector who really want to make a difference. And we lean on you all in this room, the various agencies and such that have the ability and the power to improve water quality, both locally throughout Lake Erie Basin. And we want to do all we can to support you guys and help you with your collaboration and your decisions. It's we all care about protecting our planet. It's more and more there's more and more a sense of urgency, and we have to do it for ourselves, for our children, and our grandchildren. Thank you.
All right, then. Thank you very much, Mr. Waterfield. Next up, you'll see on your agenda, it's the federal commitments to water quality, both Fort to Port. And we've used that phrase, Fort to Port, for a while. I think that clearly identifies we're connecting Fort Wayne to the Port of Toledo. I would like to ask County Commissioner Nelson Peters to come forward to introduce our next speakers. As Mr. Waterfield mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier, it's very critical that we develop these partnerships with decision makers. We're so fortunate to have our next couple of speakers share with us that broader look on both high-level state government, but also the federal government on what we're doing together for water quality efforts. So County Commissioner Nelson Peters.
Well, good morning, and welcome to this beautiful Grand Wayne Center this morning. And thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I'm particularly honored to be able to welcome today our next guest today. You know, honestly, he is a gentleman that really needs no introduction. Congressman Banks is a great friend of the farming community, of the Indiana waters community. Big part of that reason is that he gets it. He spent several years in state and county governments gaining a better understanding of how best to help people at the local level. He spent time serving as an officer in the Naval Reserve stationed in Afghanistan, where he received the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. Congressman Jim Banks currently serves as the chairman of the Republican Study Committee in Congress, and he also serves as a member of the House Committee on Armed Services, the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, and the House Committee on Education and Labor. He really understands what this whole deal is about today and the collaboration and partnerships that are necessary to bring the best result to everything that we're after, and that's clean water. He's fought hard to get the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington to redefine the definition of navigable waters under the Waters of the United States rule, and his efforts really helped to provide for greater protection of our nation's navigable waters from pollution, and they provided greater regulatory certainty for Hoosier farmers, particularly here in Northeast Indiana. In addition, he's helped to cut through a lot of the federal red tape to assist with flood mitigation efforts in communities like Decatur and others. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our representative in the United States Congress and Indiana's 3rd District Congressman, and a gentleman I'm proud to call my friend, Congressman Jim Banks.
Thank you very much to Commissioner Peters, and good morning to all of you. Commissioner, we appreciate your leadership on so many levels. There is no one that I know in Allen County politics or government who works as hard as he does. Give him a round of applause, Commissioner Peters, for his leadership and all that he does. To Dan Wire, Greg Lake, not here, we appreciate your partnership with our office, your leadership on these issues. When I was asked to participate in this a long time ago, I wanted to be a part of it, just simply to come and personally tell you that I support this cause and to give my show of support to a very important event. And to Mr. Waterfield, we appreciate the enormous contributions that you make, that your foundation makes to make our environment better in Northeast Indiana and throughout the region as well. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I want to thank, again, all of the organizers of this event in the Maumee Watershed Alliance and the Allen County Soil and Water Conservation Alliance, and giving me the honor and the opportunity to briefly, I promise you briefly, speak with you today. As your congressman, it's easy to get pulled into issues in Washington, D.C. that people outside of Washington, D.C. don't care about. right? And for good reason. Meanwhile, many localized issues like what we're talking about here today affect millions across our country, and these types of issues get relatively little attention from lawmakers and the media, though they should, which is why I'm honored to be a part of an event that is focused on the issues that you are focused on today. The water quality in the Western Lake Erie Basin is one of those such issues. Access to clean drinking water for hundreds of thousands of people is threatened by the seasonal bloom of blue-green algae, as is the well-being of wildlife throughout the basin. Spanning 3 states and nearly 7 million acres, the Western Lake Erie Basin is enormous. The lake itself provides drinking water for 14 million people, boasts among the most productive fisheries in the world, and is an economic engine for our region. That's why it's imperative that this issue is mitigated. And while there is much work to be done, I'm encouraged by the efforts that are underway today. While issues of nutrient loading and water quality impairment regarding Lake Erie make the press, we must all recognize that water quality issues also impact our nearby streams, rivers, and lakes. And those issues affect all of us. As you will learn today, while much is being done in research, public education, technical assistance, and significant financial assistance to address the water quality issue here in the Western Lake Erie Basin area. However, much work still lays before us, and thankfully, we have new technologies and practices that are being developed as we speak to help move the needle on further nutrient loading reduction in our streams, rivers, and lakes. In speaking with landowners, farmers, and others, I'm confident that all stand ready to assist in addressing this challenge, especially in Northeast Indiana. But all recognize that answers must not only be environmentally beneficial, but must also come with an economic position that makes the best management practice sustainable for the long term. One such effort worth noting is the Regional Conservation Partnership Grant, totaling nearly $8 million that the Indiana State Department of Agriculture received this summer for the Tri-State Western Lake Erie Basin collaboration. Most important about this grant is that it brings together all of the stakeholders in our region. And I'm not just talking about in Northeast Indiana. Involved in the collaboration include many institutions of higher education, including many of our own, but also the Ohio State University, state governments, the ISDA, and the Michigan Department of Agriculture, private enterprise and firms, including the Indiana Soybean Alliance, the Indiana Dairy Producers, Red Gold Tomatoes, and others, as well as many of our local farmers, many of you who are here today. This effort to focus on the headwaters of the Maumee will achieve our common goal of reducing phosphorus runoff by empowering farmers to use technologies such as the Soil and Water Assessment Tool, best suited for their respective operations to improve soil conservation and water quality efforts. What's just as important is that this strengthens the hand not of bureaucrats far away in Washington, D.C., but of those institutions and individuals right here at home who are most invested in, most familiar with, and who can most readily attend to issues concerning the Western Lake Erie Basin. So in wrapping up this morning, I again want to thank all of you for inviting me to speak. I want to thank the other elected officials that you're going to see that you saw yesterday, like Mayor Henry and the Lieutenant Governor and others that you're going to see later today, as well as the many community leaders who are represented here today as well. And I want to thank all of you, each and every one of you, for your shared commitment to making our region a better, cleaner place to live. My sincere desire is that we leave this summit today with an increased commitment to further collaboration between all involved, a willingness to explore new opportunities and new technologies, and a willingness to evaluate what's been done, see how we can improve on our past, and commitment to change us toward a goal of reducing the nutrient loading challenges that we face. My office stands ready and willing to help each and every one of you in that shared commitment and goal. I have many of my staff members who are here today, some who were here yesterday. We are here to help. And with that, we appreciate the important cause that gathered us here today. Thank you very much. Have a great day. God bless.
Our next guest. Guest has been a leader in this field for more than 25 years. He oversees about 80 local service centers, 4 area offices. He's a native of Sampson County, North Carolina. He's a graduate of North Carolina State College of Agriculture and Life Science, graduating with a degree in agricultural business management. He's someone who is very familiar with northeastern Indiana, and particularly Allen County. I understand he's taken a few trips up and down the river on Dan Wyer's barge. He is somebody who truly finds as a passion the things that we've been talking about over the last day, and we'll finish up with. Please join me in welcoming Indiana State Conservationist Jerry Raynor.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good. Glad to be here this morning. First, I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank everyone for coming today, showing your continued commitment to the water quality efforts here, not only in the Western Lake Erie Basin, but across the state of Indiana. I'm honored to be here representing USDA, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, on behalf of our NRCS Chief Terry Cosby, who had another commitment and was not able to attend. But that ride that I took July, over a year ago, very insightful, very enlightening, an opportunity to visit Fort Wayne, to see the improvements along the river, but then to hear the comments of what's happening in the town. And then last evening, hearing the presentations, talking about the improvements, but then the challenges that we still face with improving water quality. But then to visit downtown, to have dinner there over the past couple of days. I've been to the northern part of the state 4 times now in the past 2 weeks. So I'm starting to make this home, my second home up here. But to see the transformation that's happening around the watercourses in the state, very impactful. If you haven't been downtown, if you haven't been to the parks, visit. There's a reason that there has been an effort made in the state, in Fort Wayne, to highlight the waters of the state. I think I've got the forward buttons here. You've got, great. Just real quick, a little bit about me. I know you gave a brief introduction. Yes, I'm from North Carolina. I'm from the East Coast. I have a good friend sitting down here in the front row on the East Coast as well. We've circled around some of the same challenges, but no matter where we go across the U.S., the concerns we have with our natural resources, for me, it all comes back to 2 things. And I say it this way: it's soil, it's water. They're ours for life, and those are 2 resources that we must make sure we protect. There's a group sitting in the front row to my right here, FFA, our future. This is why we are doing what we do. This is why we have the passion to do these things. To Congressman Banks, thank you for highlighting that for us. Today, I just want to share with you briefly our commitment as far as USDA, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, to the many employees around the nation, our commitment to water quality, improving water quality. I will talk about some of the programs, some of the initiatives, some of the targeting that we do. Mr. Winslow, that word again, targeting. But some of the targeting we do to impact the waters of the U.S. But with these initiatives, the Tri-State Initiative, the landscape initiatives, we'll talk about a few of those. But our goal is to not only just target funding, but we also target that technical resource. The employees that we have around the state, working in these counties, working in these watersheds, training them so they understand the resource concerns that we need to address, how to address those resource concerns, what are those management practices that we need to be putting in place. The great thing about what we do, it's all a voluntary effort. So as we all come together and we're collaborating on those major projects, the decisions that we must make, again, science-based decisions, pushing us all in the right direction, making sure that our solutions are worthwhile, that they are working on the landscape. Targeting those resource dollars. Those landscape initiatives, the Western Lake Erie Basin, the Great Lakes Initiative, all of those things came about not because USDA decided this would be a great thing to do. It's all, again, guys, it goes back to being science-based. Congressman Banks mentioned in the Western Lake Erie Basin, all of those partners. But when we start talking about those partners that are really out there doing the research, that are really demonstrating that we have a water quality issue, here is the issue at hand. Here's the challenges we're going to have correcting that, but also pinpointing what's the source. Where did it come from? How did it get started? And what can we do to mitigate that? Now, a lot of these initiatives are national, they're regional. And that's because it impacted the lives greatly of those who are utilizing these resources. So as we talk about some of these, you're really going to see how we, as an agency, are invested in many different areas, but a lot of the things we do are very similar when it comes to the conservation practices and conservation activities that are happening across the landscape. Congressman Banks talked about the Western Lake Erie Basin. He gave you the investment, the recent agreement that was put in place, the grant opportunity over $8 million. NRCS has committed over almost $80 million now in the Western Lake Erie Basin. Just, again, it's about water quality. The harmful algae blooms that happen impact the economy, quality of life. You know, and now we were having a discussion last night. Mr. Winslow pointed out, now we're doing more research even on the fish in the Western Lake Erie Basin. How's that impacting the citizens that are utilizing those waters? Those investments, while it's great to make that type of investment, it's going to need to continue. What's happening in the basin is not something that started overnight. We're talking decades of impacts that have now come to the surface, literally, and now we're making those efforts to address those things. Just in Indiana, you're talking an impact on almost 80,000 acres of farmland, conservation practices that we're implementing, and that's where these funds are being obligated. But that's just a drop in the bucket. We can always say, well, we're just getting started. We've got a lot of things to accomplish, but this is only part of the issue, part of the direction we need to move in to make some corrections. From a larger scale, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Guys, these initiatives kind of go hand in hand. You've got a bigger picture now. As we talk about the Great Lakes, and it was highlighted yesterday, over 20% of the world's surface freshwater resides right here, these states surrounding the Great Lakes. How important is it when you're talking about what happens with the Great Lakes, it being a part of the world's third largest economy? That's a tremendous impact when water quality is not at a good level. So again, as far as USDA, we're still making those same investments. We're still implementing those conservation practices. But how much of that is being impacted with what we do in Indiana? One thing we all need to realize is that when it comes to the water quality impacts, we all need to play our part. So when we look at these initiatives, well, Indiana has a small portion of the Great Lakes, a small portion of the Western Lake Erie Basin. But in the state of Indiana, if we do our part to improve water quality, that's one less impact. You're starting to mitigate, again, those risks that we're facing. But then we can shift that funding, as we talked earlier, as USDA says, well, we've got it at a manageable level in Indiana. Let's start shifting those targets, shift our efforts, our resources to the other states. Let's make the same impact there. Maybe we, here in Indiana, maybe we're a little smarter than Ohio or Michigan. We figured it out quicker. We'll start shifting those dollars there, shifting staff, putting the resources where those challenges are so we can make sure we're correcting, making those improvements across the entire watershed. Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Now, last night at dinner, I got an earful about this particular program and a couple other meetings. Through the Farm Bill, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, we talk about partnerships, we talk about our collaboration, but I'll share a little bit about Indiana's partnership toward the end of the presentation. But with this particular program, it allows those challenges, those concerns we face to be brought to the door of USDA, to NRCS. So the partners on the landscape, just like Sea Grant, Ohio Sea Grant, they're doing research. They're saying, USDA, we have a challenge. We have an issue. Here's where you need to be. Here's where you need to target funding, target resources. Now we can build a program. This program allows us to pull those resources together, again, target those areas, make an impact. But it minimizes what NRCS's responsibility is, because when you talk about a local effort, the best way to implement these practices to improve water quality and to improve soil health, it is at the local level. I've talked with several in the room, and the producers, the local communities, the local staff, they know the producers. They know what challenges are on the landscape. This program allows for that local delivery of a program. But you can, not only with our soil and water district partners or our State Department of Ag partners, you're talking non-traditional partners here. We may be visiting with and working with companies that have moved into the area. Your Amazons, your FedEx, those companies are now looking at projects. They talk about sustainability. They talk about those things that are now attracting more business for them. But when it comes to the product, the consumer wants to know, how environmentally safe is it? And the more those companies are looking at products that have been grown in that sustainable arena, these projects help. This particular program helps out. It kind of helps them on one side to say, yes, we have farmers and producers that are growing products in a sustainable manner. If there are improvements that need to be made on the landscape, this program allows us to help target those particular areas that need improvement. Now, a couple of other initiatives here. National Water Quality Initiative. Well, yes, Jared, we've talked about several initiatives. This particular initiative was a major concern, and the watersheds that are impacted or that are part of the Water Quality Initiative, they're actually chosen by EPA. So while at the local level, there are certain things that we recognize may be of concern, at a national level, agencies like EPA are actually looking at other concerns that we may not be aware of. They're bringing those to our attention. Again, it's still water. It's still water quality. Why would we have missed this? Well, it could have been something decades. It could be certain chemicals that we're not testing for that may not affect the agricultural landscape. Could be a commercial property that has created this impact. But then how do we, again, reduce that impact? How do we mitigate any risk in those watersheds? So with those watersheds being designated, and we have several in the state of Indiana, since 2012, the work we've done here just in the state of Indiana, 3,700 producers we've worked with, almost 1 million acres that we've implemented conservation practices on. Our investment here in Indiana, we've done a lot of work on a lot of acres, roughly about $1 million. The money's one thing, but what are we getting out of it? In a few, I'm going to highlight some of the things that we are getting, some of the benefits you're going to see from implementing all of these practices. The Mississippi River Basin, the healthy river basin. We're a long way from the Gulf Coast, a long way from the Gulf Coast. And we were wondering, well, why is this imported in the state of Indiana? Well, divide the state, you'll see where the water starts to run. We've got part of it Gulf Coast, the other part ending in the Gulf, part in the Gulf Coast, and I just mentioned, just slipped my mind, Great Lakes. So as our water starts to move, the sediment that it's carrying with it, the nutrients that are moving, it's leaving Indiana, other states, north and heading south. And then it's impacting the Gulf Coast in a tremendous way. Again, we're doing our part. Conservation on the landscape, reducing the nutrient runoff, reducing sediment leaving the sites. We're doing what we need to do here in the state of Indiana to make sure we're improving those areas. It's a lot of work. We're covering a lot of territory. You may say, well, Jerry, it can leave Indiana clean. And just as soon as it hits the southern part of the state, what happens? It may have run into another barrier. Well, hopefully our counterparts south and other states are doing the same thing. And guys, I will attest they are. May not be doing it as well as Indiana, but we all have those same targets we have to meet, the same reduction goals that we're faced with. We're all implementing conservation at a level to try and impact these water courses and our water quality. A state nutrient management reduction strategy. I just touched on that. Those strategies have been put in place to say, here's your challenges you have. Dr. Chris pointed out yesterday, here's your target, guys. We need to reduce those things. That 40% reduction that we're talking about, is it right around the corner? How much of it can we change quickly? There's a lot of things that come with nutrients leaving the state of Indiana. Agriculture is a major part of that. Now, that's not to say that our producers are not doing a great job right now. But there are circumstances that even the improvements we're making now, it takes time for those improvements to start to show up in our waters. As we're doing more monitoring, we're starting to see, yes, we're making improvements. But we've been at these improvement efforts for 40, 50 years in some areas. Are they making a difference? Yes. We're not going to turn this ship around overnight, but we are making steady progress in doing this. But what I wanted to point out here is, again, heading into that area of partnerships. How important is a partnership? How important is it when all of us can sit down around the table, we can have discussions, We can come to terms on our resource concerns. What are the challenges? What are the causes? But when we get ready to make those decisions on how do we correct some of these things, we all may not be happy when we walk away from that table. But we need to keep our eyes focused on what we're trying to accomplish. And the state nutrient reduction strategy helps us do that. Set goals, set targets. And here in the state of Indiana, I have to take a moment to actually brag on some of the things that we do here in the state. And it was mentioned last night, collaborative decision-making. Indiana is one of those states, when we sit down as partners around the table and we talk about conservation and improvements, we try to make sure every member's at the table and every member there leaves with a task at hand that they need to perform. Whether it's NRCS and conservation and the amount of funding, it can be a question of, Jerry, can you get more funding and can we target it in these particular areas? That may be my challenge for the day when I walk away from that table. If I can, yes, here's what we can and cannot do. We'll all understand that. But we'll all know we're all facing the same challenge. We're all trying to get to the same goal. And we'll know what role we play in that decision. So having those strategies in place are definitely beneficial. Every partner stays focused on that particular strategy. Great potential at reducing that nitrogen and phosphorus entering the our water courses. But then we start to jump into other areas, urban areas. Somebody's at the table that's going to be focused in those areas. When it comes to water management in those particular areas, we've got someone at the table that has a focus there. How do we pull all of that together? You must be willing to sit down and have those heart-to-heart, not so pleasant discussions. Don't be afraid of the conflict. Be ready to address the concerns at the table. And when you come back together, now let's talk about our achievements, our milestones, and how much more we can be doing. Conservation practices. I've talked a lot about those, mentioned a few of those. I will say here in the state of Indiana, I was told when I came here a little over 3 years ago, Jerry, you will have to be ready to talk about soil health. Soil health is going to lead everything we do. Improving the soil, improving water quality, but not so much from this. It's always about the environment when we have those discussions, but productivity, changing management strategies for producers. All of those things are going to be involved. But one of the things that I've come to realize is that while I've worked in a lot of places across the country, we implement conservation practices. That's what our agency's about. We're moving in the direction of implementing conservation systems. So it's not just a soil health system. When we talk about a conservation system, it may involve soil health, nutrient reduction, management changes, crop rotations. It involves a lot of conservation practices. So we have to spend time actually talking with our producers. And yes, you can move to the next slide, that'd be perfectly fine. It kind of highlights some of those practices, maybe areas we're implementing filter strips, cover crops needed, we're reducing tillage. May not move from conventional straight to no-till, maybe strip till may be a tillage method, but it's reducing the amount of tillage we're utilizing. Manure management, I know we've talked a lot about manure management. You've got areas that are high in phosphorus. What do we do about those? Well, if regulation says, well, you can't apply, how do we mitigate that for a producer when he has farms and fields he can't apply waste to? Where are the solutions? And we talk about transporting that particular manure to another site that may need more fertilizer. Phosphorus could be applied in those areas. Nitrogen could be utilized in those areas. But it's always a economic decision. There's always risk involved. There's always a decision beyond just that partnership. because the most important partner, and a lot of times we fail to have them at the table when we're talking about these larger discussions, is the producer, because he's going to be the one impacted in the realm of landscape and agriculture. Those producers, those farmers, those landowners are the ones that are going to be the ones that will have to implement these particular practices. We talked yesterday, the cost associated with those. Those are some barriers that we have to make decisions of how do we overcome some of those barriers. But those benefits, not only to our natural resources, not only to our environment, but also to productivity, profitability. But at the same time, we're always improving those natural resources. So there's going to be some give and take, but there are also going to have to be some areas of compromise. We've talked about those conservation practices. Again, stopping the erosion, nutrient loss, the 4R programs. A lot of these practices, guys, are tied into so many other initiatives and directions of our partners. We seem to be running in circles with some of the things we do. But when your plan and my plan, and we have the same mission, we're after the same goals, we're going to start to overlap in areas. It's never a bad thing. We need to make sure we're documenting that progression, our performance as well. Conservation practices, innovative practices, two-stage ditch practice, taking that traditional steep-sided ditch, staging that particular practice that it will retain nutrients. It will hold them for a while. Now, it may be solving one of our concerns, but where's the resource that says, is it impacting something to a greater extent? So while we are being innovative with practices, there's research that comes behind with that to move the practice forward, but also to see how effective that particular practice is going to be. Edge of field monitoring, implementing practices such as the two-stage ditch, but then monitoring that particular practice. I always like to see the slides with all the monitoring stations around the state and all the super gauges. And then we're talking about peak performance, low performance, when we have major rainstorms, a 2-inch rain versus a 6-inch rain. What's happening on that landscape? Edge of field monitoring is just another one of those monitoring stations that helps us track the impacts that are coming off of the landscape of this, with this particular practice in place. What's the benefit? Are we seeing the reductions we need to see? Or are there things we need to do above this particular practice that may even reduce our runoff, reduce our nutrient loss? So again, when we talk innovation, we're talking conservation practices. Now, the most innovative group I know of, and growing up on a farm, are those farmers, those producers. We've seen equipment changed, created, made, formed to fit what they need. And now when this particular model goes, when we paint it green and slap a label on it, that John Deere label, it comes with a price tag. That particular piece of equipment may be needed by multiple producers, but the price, again, it's an economic decision. How do we mitigate that risk for those producers? Innovation comes in a lot of different areas, not just conservation practices, changing the flow, changing the width and depth and those kind of things. There are other tools out there that comes along with innovation and technology, but again, there's a cost associated with that. Bioreactors, an expensive innovation. It's kind of hard to put those on every landscape. Sometimes you may not even have the areas to install those. We talked yesterday, we heard yesterday, Ohio's getting ready to start evaluating wetlands, seeing how impactful they will be to nutrient reduction, nutrient loss, runoff, those kind of things. We spent a lot of money on landscapes just being able to get rid of those trees and those wet areas and installing tiles so we can grow our crops. just to realize some of those areas we probably need to put back into a wetland state just to be able to help meet our reduction goals. Again, we talk about innovation. Those may be some things that seem far-fetched, but we've got to have a starting point. We've got to figure out, are there some new things out there that will help us reach those goals, those reduction goals? The last thing we want to have within agriculture is any type of regulation. We want this to be voluntary. To be honest with you, that's why I enjoy working with NRCS. It's all voluntary. We can walk the landscape. We can talk about the challenges on the landscape. How do we solve those? How do we correct some of the problems there? But then we can be patient with the landowner while they're making those decisions. Because again, there are some things that economics come into play, and productivity, sustainable practices, equipment, technology. What am I going to be needing here? So I need to make those decisions carefully. And we can be patient with them while they're doing that. Just want to quickly highlight acres in some of our targeted areas. The Western Lake Erie Basin, you'll see the number of acres here from 2015 to 2020. I think we're the next slide. Yes, right there. The number of acres there, it's up and down, and sometimes that will fluctuate, and it's based on the amount of funding that we may receive in any particular year. But then there are other practices. When we talk about acres, we may be implementing practices that are on an acre footprint. It could be a waste storage practice that may not be impacting, 10, 15 acres, 30 acres, 100 acres. So when we see the acres, you see the different shades there, whether it's the Western Lake Erie Basin, the Great Lakes, or through an RCPP. The thing is, we are always implementing practices in the Western Lake Erie Basin because of its importance. We want to look at the funding that's been targeted for that same area, and you'll see the amount of funding from 2015 to 2020. Now, I will share with you from 19 to 20, the agency overall took a different approach to some of our conservation programs. One of our programs, the Conservation Stewardship program, that while that's one of the programs, those practices are also installed in one of these particular initiatives. But the agency decided to take that funding and spread it out evenly across the country. The central region of the U.S. is where, prior to 2020, 80% of our conservation stewardship program funding was implemented in the central region states. 11 states implemented 80% of that funding. So it seemed a little one-sided. Now, we understand why. Well, we looked at it from the standpoint that we were the best region, but it's where a lot of your row crop agriculture is happening. Larger farms, you have larger concerns, but then let's go back and focus on the Mississippi River Basin, the Great Lake area. We have water quality challenges, very similar to the East Coast and the Chesapeake Bay. But when we started looking at the landscape and how many conservation practices through these programs can be implemented, our staff just jumped up and said, look, we've got areas that this will make a tremendous difference. So those things, we started implementing those practices. So that 2019 to 2020 shift did impact us. We're still getting conservation done at a high level here in the state of Indiana. But I think there are going to be some things coming in the next few years that's probably going to shift some of that funding back to states. Hopefully increase funding across the board for all of us. Conservation practices being implemented. You see the numbers there on the screen. We do a lot of work here in the state. That's increased as well, the number of conservation practices. over 17,000 practices modeled to quantify reductions, whether it's sediment or nutrient. We've evaluated those practices to say, yes, these practices are impacting, reducing the sediment, reducing nutrients, hitting our watercourses. And that's just a 1 year snapshot. So if we're doing that 1 year, and we've been doing this for multiple years, and as an agency, we still have a lot of work to do. Because not only will it be that one practice on a landscape, we're putting multiple practices on a landscape. But we're making our way there. I also want to point out that almost 300,000 cover crop acres that we've modeled to say they are sequestering carbon. Now, I have to give Indiana kudos again for soil health. When, again, I got to the state of Indiana, they talked a lot about soil health. And then even prior to being here, Indiana was always being publicized for leading the nation with the number of acres in cover crop. Farmer and producers are implementing these soil health practices or strategy or soil health systems. It's a great thing to see, especially when you get here and you start traveling the state. But we've got neighboring states now knocking on our door with the number of cover crop acres. But one of the things that we've pointed out in prior presentations is that about a quarter of the acres being put into cover crops are funded through federal programs. That other 3/4, producers have realized that it will make a difference when it comes to improving the soil, sustainability of the farm, productivity, impact on yields. They're seeing the difference. They're seeing the difference in their bottom line when it comes to the economics and profitability of the farm. So that's why they're moving those things forward. Now, when we talk about solutions, you talk about decisions, collaborative decisions. In the state of Indiana, it's been decided we need more acres. We're only just scratching the surface with covering our farms in cover crops. Unlike one of my prior states in the state of Maryland, where they have a substantial cover crop program, we're still trying to move in that direction. But we're also being, once again, innovative, creative, that out-of-the-box thinking. How do we do that? So in a program, we actually have a program in the Whitewater, in the river basin there, led by one of our partners at TNC, the Nature Conservancy. And we're trying to offset the new cover crop acres by offering a reduced or an incentive for crop insurance. It's been talked about in a lot of arenas, talked about in a lot of areas. The Nature Conservancy said, let's see if we can do this. They moved forward with it. So that may help us get another 100, 200, 300,000 acres into cover crop. We need something else. We should always be thinking about what's next. What can we do to continue to improve upon these numbers of conservation practices that we can get implemented? Now, for me, these are the things that I think really speaks to what we do in a year, just a 1 year snapshot. I've been in several meetings, congressional meetings, visiting our congressional members in DC, and we talk about outcomes. So what's the outcome? What happens because we're installing all of these conservation practices? And when we talk about outcomes, well, everybody in NRCS knows when we talk about how many feet of fence we install, that's a lot of fence. That did a lot of good things. But to the taxpayer, that's where these funds are coming from. To the taxpayer, what does that mean? So when we talk about the amount of phosphorus that has been removed from a water course, what does that look like to to any taxpayer? So working with the state, again, part of that partnership and saying, how do we package this so the general public would look at it and say, oh, I see the picture now. It looks very simple, looks very elementary. It is. I guess that's probably why I like it. So you just look at the picture and say, oh, I see what we're talking about. Amount of sediment when we talk about tons. You see how many, what does that amount to? Phosphorus, what does that look like? And you're talking 8 rail cars. Well, the general public knows what a rail car looks like. Oh, you're talking 8 of those have been removed in 1 year? The same with nitrogen. And this is just Indiana. This is just in the state of Indiana. So if we're making this kind of reduction in 1 year, you may want to look at it and say, well, what's left? How much more do we have to do? How many more pounds do we need to remove? A lot. Because this is just 2020. It was the same. It wasn't the same. Those numbers were there in 19 and 18 and 17. So we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to those reductions. On this particular one, you're looking at something, 42 billion gallons of water would be needed to reduce that amount of nitrogen you just saw to meet drinking water conditions. Kind of helps put things in perspective. In the Western Lake Erie Basin, you see the numbers in front of you. They speak for themselves, but we still have work to do. We still have a tremendous amount of sediment that we need to keep from reaching those water courses, remove the amount of phosphorus, remove the amount of nitrogen. But a lot of the conservation practices will help us better utilize some of these inputs while reducing the need for others. Carbon, which is a big topic with the administration, a big push for carbon credits and carbon markets. How many? You're looking at almost 29,000 vehicles. That's in comparison that you're removing, you're reducing. It's like taking that many off the road. Great, but we're going to have to do that annually. We're going to have to make not just these conservation practices, but other things. And we just compared this to cover crops, just the use of cover crops. What about the forested areas? What about the areas surrounding our towns, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, Vincennes? What about those areas as well? Everything about carbon sequestration, just showing you the measurements on the landscape in comparison to the cover crops that we install. Guys, I will, before we get to any questions, and we can kind of hold those to the end, I will be here. I want to end by saying I got just a few seconds. They told me the lights were going to go out if I didn't finish on time, so I want to make sure we don't get put in the dark here. Conservation practices work. We label them as the best management practices. It may be best for that situation, may be better for another situation, but those management practices, conservation management practices work. The data's proving it. You're going to see here later, I can't wait to the presentation. You're going to see the data not only in the Western Lake Erie Basin in Indiana, but these practices and the innovations being implemented across the country. The data's proving it's working. That's why we're doing a lot of the monitoring. The testimonials from our farmers, our producers, are telling us it works. We need to be able to replicate that every acre, every farm, every county, every state should be on edge, just trying to figure out how do we continue to replicate these improvements we've made. None of these efforts belong to NRCS, but none of them belong to USDA. We are just a partner. In most locations, we're probably the biggest partner. We're one of the partners that will bring the most funding to the table. If we don't have producers that are willing to step up and make these improvements, or partners or towns or communities or associations or these river alliances, if they're not willing to step up and make those improvements, it doesn't matter how much money we have. We're just throwing it away. We have to invest in these natural resources. I stated it earlier. I keep it very basic. Soil and water, if they're ours for life, we have to make an investment in those areas. Growing crops, being productive, leaving it for the next generation, extremely important. Water quality impacts economics. We've seen that around the country. The lack of water impacts an economy. We have some partners out west that would probably love for you guys to start pumping water as hard as you could, out west. It's needed, not only for crop production, but for livelihood, for recreation, for those things we do day to day. It's truly needed. I just want to leave you with this one last thought. Again, not only soil and water is ours for life, but it's for our future. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago. We had a group, farmers, producers, agency people, but then we had a couple of people there with the FFA. But I told them, I said, the producers we always talk about, they're the most important people in the room. Today, this group up front is the most important people in the room. At that previous meeting, the most important people in the room didn't care what we said, what we talked about. They were in their own world. Some could walk, some couldn't. They probably hadn't even reached school age yet. Those were the most important people in the room. It's why we do what we do, why we take the efforts, while we're in meetings like this, while we're having these collaborative sessions to talk about strategies, come up with different ideas on how to improve water quality. But if we don't improve the quality of our water, why are we here? Appreciate your time. I'll be here throughout the session. Pull me in a corner if you have anything you'd like to share with me. I'll be glad to listen. Thank you.
Okay, very, very good. It was just said, best impacts are at the local level with the support of state and federal level. As you follow the agenda, you will see that we have purposely started the flow with broad initiatives, funding transitioning into our local Maumee Watershed Alliance. We're proud to have you here. We're going to take a brief break. We will reconvene at 10:25 with some very interesting information from the Chesapeake and lessons that we can learn and transfer right here to the Western Lake Erie Basin. So please, let's take a break, and we'll be back in here at 10:25. Thank you.